Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you to Luxus, Lund University, to this digital seminar about taking stock of Colombia's peace agreement after 5 years and how it has affected land use and local communities in Colombia. This event is organized by FOCALI, the University of Gothenburg, Lund University, Luxus, and the Faculty of Science, with the support of SIANI and the Stockholm Resilience Center as well. Today we are here because it's been 5 years that the peace agreement in Colombia has been signed by the government and by the FARC-EP, and a lot of things have happened. And those of you who are familiar with Colombia have probably seen the news about the very slow implementation of the peace agreement and kind of adverse outcomes on local communities regarding land use, the environment, but also social security and environmental justice. So back in 2016, the peace agreement was hailed as a historic step, historic agreement between the government of Colombia under Manuel Santos and the FARC leadership in Havana. And people were quite joyful in Colombia that a new era is going to begin, leading to a peaceful future that brings more stability, but also reduces the incredible violence that many people have suffered in Colombia. However, from the beginning, there were voices saying that we have to be careful because this peace agreement might also lead to negative impacts on natural environment. It might actually lead to increasing deforestation, which was actually then rapidly seen across the Amazon, across the Chocó, but also in other parts of Colombia, particularly in areas where the FARC have demobilized and actually retreated into camps. And at the same time, there has been an incredible wave of violence, particularly against social leaders, indigenous leaders, environmental defenders in rural areas of Colombia who are actually standing up against these new intimidations and these new pressures on land and resources from violent groups, armed gangs, narco traffickers. And this has sadly continued to this day. So there's an increasing violence against people who are trying to defend their rights, their community rights, indigenous rights, but also the environment. And Colombia has been just recently pointed out as one of the most dangerous places for environmental activists, particularly in the southern parts of Colombia. And this is basically a situation that is just continuing. So we've seen reports of indigenous territories being invaded. There's been illegal deforestation soaring in the Amazon, particularly with large-scale fires, making space for cattle ranching, sometimes coca plantations. Illegal mining, which is rampant. This has been really increased quite dramatically in the last couple of years since the peace agreement was signed. Today, we're going to talk about this. We have 3 themes for which we have invited speakers. The first one is on land use and land use change since the peace agreement was signed. We have Jesica López from the University, Natalia Pérez from the Fraser University, and Nicola Clerici from the Universidad de Rosario. The second theme is on social dynamics. Juanita Esguerra-Rezk is going to talk about her research. Sandra Valencia from the University of Gothenburg is also going to share some insights with us. And Paula Sánchez is going to present her findings from her master thesis, which she wrote at the Stockholm University. And Olaya from DeJusticia will also bring us his viewpoints on what is actually happening in Colombia. And then we have particularly local insights, one from Christina Van Dexter, who has been living and working in Putumayo for a number of years and who's affiliated with George Mason University, but living in Colombia. Unfortunately, Julio Andrés Rosso and Carlos De Caro had personal issues and they couldn't join us today, but we are going to share a video from Julio Andrés. My name is Thorsten Krause and I'm going to moderate this event. So I'm welcoming you.
Recreated a land grabbing escalation. So they are alarming deforestation rates, and mostly approximately 66% of this deforestation is happening in and is concentrated in the Amazon. So I'm working in an action-oriented research where there is other drivers of deforestation, but what basically I'm focusing on is how this expansion of the cattle ranching is affecting the lands in the Amazon, both the illegal activities and also the illegal. So there are a number of different problems. There's low land costs, there's land grabbing, there is an increase in population, and this is clearly creating some impacts in the ecological equilibrium of these forests, basically in the northwestern part of the region, of the Amazon region in Colombia. So there could be many pathways, but one of the possible solutions that we're looking at is how to consolidate land use policies, concrete to benefit protected areas, but also establish some sort of alternative economies in the area. So the drivers of deforestation in the Colombian Amazon are many, from praderización, which means clearing land for pastures, to construction of roads, agriculture of other commodities such as palm oil, extensive cattle ranching, and others. These are creating specifically what we denominate the arc of deforestation. So here is the northern part of the Amazon region in Colombia, and there are 4 different natural parks: the Chiribiquete, Nucac, La Macarena, and Tinigua. And what this deforestation arc is creating is from the southern part of Putumayo all the way up to Meta and Guaviare. And here is where most of the agricultural frontier is concentrated back from the 70s, but now it's being accelerated by the presence of the cattle. So as I mentioned before, I'm concentrating into the cattle farming, both the legal and the illegal activities. So the more cattle owners, the more land owners are needed. And these farms start predarization, both for illicit crops, illegal logging, or even wildlife trafficking. But then this predarization is creating or is continuing under the base of bad farming processes, which allows more and more people to enter the dairy and the meat production. So the sales of this livestock have 2 different roads. The one that is directly transferred to the legal slaughterhouses, but actively with a lot of intermediaries, unknown intermediaries that are allowing the illegal. So this is a study, or this is a document about, it's an investigation from the Environmental Investigation Agency in Washington about Grupo Éxito, which is one of the biggest supermarket chains. They declare that there's officially suppliers for the meat and dairy production, but they don't clarify that involving that supply chain are indirect suppliers that are, for example, placed in Guaviare or even inside in the northern area of the Chiribiquete National Park. This is difficult to know because there's no traceability platforms in Colombia regarding to that, nor consumer awareness about where the meat or the dairy is coming from. And this was recently this year. So there are a bunch of other supermarket chains attached. These are just some pictures, so you can see this all are pictures in the Chiribiquete, except for this one down there, which is also palm oil around the Nucac reserve, which is obviously now expanding very fast. And these other 3 pictures show the creation of roads that clear land, and then this land is established as pasture for the cattle that is rotating both legal and illegally. So just in a general term, this is a set of recommendations from a very global perspective. So in Colombia, there is an urgent need to improve the land governance, also strengthen the monitoring systems, specifically the transparency and the land registration. There has to be a clearer or a stronger way to protect the areas that are already existent. And basically offering alternative livelihoods would be a way to do so. So this is something that we are looking during my project. And finally, there has to be an involvement, a clear involvement of the management of these forests from the cultural values of the indigenous communities and the farmers that are living in these areas. And because there is a very interesting agreement created in 2016 there has to be clear lines that enhance local governance for the people that is living there. So thank you so much for listening.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Our next speaker is Natalia Sofia Pérez, and I'm going to give you the floor right after. And we take some questions after Nicola's presentation.
Okay, hello, hi everyone. Thank you all for being here, and also to Jessica, Juanita, Paula, and Torsten for organizing this event. As Torsten mentioned, I'm Natalia Pérez, and I'm joining in from a city known as Vancouver, that is located on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Coast Salish nations, more specifically the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations who still live among us, and whose historical relationships with these lands continue to this day. I am grateful for the opportunity of living and working here. And I also want to acknowledge that I benefit from this form of ongoing dispossession that is taking place on this land. Full disclosure, I won't refer specifically to land use changes in Colombia. I would rather focus on a matter that is closely related and in many ways shapes what happens with land use, which is that one of property. So according to considerations included in the integrated rural reform, which is known as the first point of the Colombian peace agreements, the unresolved question of property in land, and particularly its concentration, the exclusion of the peasantry, and the backwardness of rural communities is one of the leading historical causes of the armed conflict. Consequently, two of the integrated rural reform's most ambitious goals are massive land formalization and access for campesinos. In fact, they aim to formalize 7 million hectares of land and grant access to 3 million additional through a land fund. Numerous analysts in Colombia and elsewhere have noticed that the IRR shortcomings so far are multiple, particularly in relation to its inability to advance land redistribution, as it has not tackled land concentration and gender inequalities in land access. Following a prevalent narrative concerning agrarian reform and land policies in Colombia, the IRR is starting to be seen by many, once again, as a well-intended effort, yet incapable of transforming prevalent property regimes due to the nature of the political economy of those property regimes are compounded by institutional constraints, such as lack of state's capacity, lack of political will, or budgetary restrictions. So instead of analyzing the success of the failure of agrarian reform and land policies in general, in their own term, and of the IRR in particular ways, and also other policies, my research draws from critical legal studies and legal geographies to argue that given the decisive role that the notion of property has in the design, the implementation, and the outcomes of agrarian policies, it is urgent to center and to denaturalize property by adopting, hopefully, a relational analytic that examines how property is always coming into being through practices, through discourses that must be historically, geographically, and politically situated, always, hopefully. I argue that a particular set of gender and racialized assumptions about property and the ways in which it constitutes spaces and constitutes subjects and subjectivities tend to inform the design and the implementation of Colombian agrarian legislation and policies, and also their scholarly analysis. One way of observing this is through the intimate connection between the labor theory of property, initially proposed by John Locke, and the assumptions about property that underpin Colombian agrarian legislations and policies up to date. So the first Agrarian legislations that tap on Lockean labor property were introduced in Colombia, not in the 20th century, as is commonly believed, but actually at the end of the 19th century. And those legislations proposed that possession, which is named occupation in legal terms in Colombia, would be enacted when an individual mixed their labor with the land, rendering it productive. That individual couldn't be an indigenous person, couldn't be a Black person, but yeah, it's a very heavily racialized concept. Although these laws didn't target campesinos, in a way they spoke to them, as Catherine Legrand has shown. Campesinos immediately started to mobilize those legislations to contest the land dispossession that they were enduring. I think it is essential, of course, to recognize the multiple ways in which campesinos have shaped agrarian legislations and agrarian policies during and throughout the 20th century through multiple struggles and at huge cost for them, cost of their life that we still see now. But it is also critical to consider how these policies tend to reproduce the racialized and gender orders in which they were conceived. So in this sense, for instance, at the end of the 19th century, Colombian Criollo elites had managed to establish themselves as white after almost like a century of independence, 8 decades. It is, white means, in my language, fully human and full citizens. And then they also situated rural populations in the country in different places in the racial hierarchy, according not only to their skin color, but also to the altitude of the lands they inhabited and their practices concerning those lands, the type of agriculture, or whether they were fishermen or different practices. Additionally, this legislation, and the gender, of course, sorry. Additionally, these legislations were only introduced after decades of failed attempts to attract white settlers, white immigrants who were seen as the ones capable of rendering the land productive. This process was of increasing productivity in the countryside was being directly observed through the so-called successful expansion of settler colonialism in the US and Canada that was taking place at the time. And that was based on the disavowal of indigenous sovereignty, that English property law founded on Lockean and other liberal theories of property enabled, and also based on like a terrible genocide and open and legal genocidal policies. So in conclusion, what I'm trying to propose here is, instead of jumping into, analyzing and anticipating in a way, again, one more time in which our agrarian policies are failing campesinos and other populations, we should center and denaturalize property, and try to think as alternative ways in which we can think about the failure of these policies, to open a bit of a space to reclaim the centrality that campesinos' labor, campesinos' knowledges and practices of property must have in these policies that genuinely unsettle the racialized and the gender orders they are usually inscribed in. That's it. I'm not sure if I spoke too fast.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Natalia. I see we have a question in the Q&A, but we keep that for after Nicola's presentation, so we can then have some time to take these questions that are written in the chat. And please, if you have a question, type those in the chat, in the Q&A. And also, if there's a question that you would like to vote for, we can move questions up if there's several questions popping up, and you can vote for questions so they come up higher, and we can take them first. Nicola, please.
Okay, we'll share my presentation. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Today in this speed talk, I'm going to talk about deforestation and socio-ecological dynamics in post-conflict Colombia. So after the peace agreement, we've seen the FARC demobilized in several centers called the TCR. And as a consequence, large remote sensing of Colombia became suddenly accessible. As a consequence of these territories, especially in remote regions, became permeable to several illegal actors, which are armed and non-armed as well. Also, on top of that, there are several FARC dissident groups which didn't sign the agreement and which are also currently present in the country, especially in the biogeographical Amazon. Talking about deforestation, Colombia is characterized historically by quite widespread deforestation. We've seen some major direct drivers, and Jessica talked about it. It is very dominant, the illegal ranching expansion accompanied by land grabbing and the black market of land speculation. Together with this agricultural expansion, illicit mining and illicit crops, especially of coca and gold, and the widespread development of unplanned infrastructure, and to a minor extent also of illegal logging. If we see at historical data of deforestation, we can see that from years 2008 till 2015, with some oscillation, we have more or less a constant value. But after the peace agreement, in the next 2 years, we observe a huge increase in deforestation till arriving to the astonishing number of 217,000 hectares in 2017. As a result, the government increased some enforcement, and in the next 2 years, we see the number going down again. Unfortunately, last year, this number goes up again, probably as a result also of the interaction with the COVID-19 pandemics. And deforestation is not only about habitat loss, but also about the disruption of the regional landscape spatial structure. So what we study and observe is that at a regional level, there is a huge acceleration of the disconnection between the biogeographical Andes in the top left corner of this image and the lowlands of the Amazon. And this connection, this corridor are extremely important for the maintenance of the biotic gene flow, because at the base of this gene flow, there are hybridization and all the processes as the basis of speciation. So key for the maintenance and production of biodiversity. In this region, especially, these disruptions produced by illegal cattle ranching and to a minor extent to coca crops expansion. We analyzed also what's happening in protected areas. We made an analysis of 39 national natural parks and reserved and some buffer areas, comparing three-year window before and after the peace agreement. And we found that there is inside protected area also a highly significant increase in deforestation rate, about 177% in a large number, 31/39 of these parks. With what is happening, there is an expansion of illegal cattle ranching, also in this case inside protected areas, and we're not talking just about small patches, but huge patches of several hectares. So we can, this suggests also that there is a form of connivance between local authorities and these illegal ranchers. We notice there is also an expansion of illegal crops, especially of coca crops, inside protected areas and parks. And this is possibly due to the no fumigation policy, which is present in these parks that incentivizes somehow the expansion of illegal cropping. And finally, also colonos that lives inside these protected areas, they feel legitimized to expand their crops and to deforestate due to the absence of any environmental authority inside these protected areas. Another important point that has been touched already is about environmental defenders. Also here, after the peace agreement, we observe an increase in murders and killings of environmental leaders. Only for the first semester of 2021, we arrived to the astonishing number of 78 leaders, social leaders and environmental defenders killed. And on top of that, also hundreds and hundreds of non-fatal environmentally related crimes to local population. So to resume, the exit of the FARC increased largely the permeability of several remote territories to illegal armed and non-armed actors. And the government could not react in time in order to counteract this increase in conversion of natural habitat. So there is, in other words, a lack of physical and legal presence of the government in these territories. And also this comes with some other institutional inefficiency, for example, a slow recovery of the stolen land and a formalization of this land, a very slow advancement of the Colombian land cadastre, and the controllers of it does not determine which is the detriment in quantitative terms of the natural patrimony due to deforestation. And finally, also the military forces, they focused on very few high-value targets, especially inside protected areas. There are some possible ways forward. For example, recover the grabbed land and perform some ecological restoration of this land in order to give an important institutional sign that the state is actually present in these territories. Also involving local communities in the management of forestry by community forestry. There are several examples in the literature that shows that when local communities are involved, there is actually a real slowing of deforestation. Ecotourism was also growing pretty much after the peace agreement and slowing down due to the pandemic, but it can actually represent a real way to conserve biodiversity while actually improving local development. Also, economic investment is very needed in these rural regions and remote regions where the economy is actually not formalized very much. And finally, important, Colombia should sign the Escazú agreement to protect environmental leaders and population. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Wonderful. So I see in the Q&A there's two questions, and they're both around beef, the beef value chain and consumption. Maybe I'm going to address the first question, which was directed to Jesica. Maybe she can answer. Maybe then also Nicola, you can come in, and also Natalia, if you want to maybe have a very short round of how you feel like you would answer these questions.
Yes, I can start responding. Yeah. So so about what would you think has to be changed in the chain to combat deforestation? Well, there is a very clear information from all the governmental organizations. One of them, for example, is the ICA, Instituto Colombiano Agropecuario. They have all the registers of all the cattle vaccinations and all the land that this has been used. They don't have any connection with all the other governmental instances that are responsible for the use of land. So one way to solve or to make a step forward in how to control the chain of the cattle would be to create a clear communication between these intergovernmental collaborations. Another thing that has been talked recently in the literature is about the transparency and the traceability of the provenance of the products. It's very difficult because Colombia has not a technological approach. The infrastructure for all this technology to be put in place is quite a major effort. It has to be involve a lot of different stakeholders. So this is something that will probably has to be changed, but how realistic this could be, it depends of many actors. So another thing on the other spectrum is to inform consumers about the awareness of where the provenance of dairy and meat products are coming. Sometimes the region, for example, big cities, Bogota, Villao, etc., they don't really connect where this meat is coming from. So more communication, more education, more civil society engagement in these topics is very needed. I don't know if Nicola wants to add something to that answer, probably.
I think you gave a very complete answer. I think the key is traceability because the laws are actually there. Yeah, Colombia has a lot of very complete environmental laws, but the problem is about enforcement of these laws. So there is a slow process of enforcement of all these legislation related to environmental crimes. And I think here about beef, the key is is traceability. Okay, so we should actually check very much all the traceability chain in order to follow where this beef come from. I think the problem is very well established. Now we have to actually enforce this traceability and these laws.
Okay, there's more questions coming in, and I think that's a really useful, and some of them we keep for later, particularly the reforestation goal and the Artemisia campaign, because I think we're going to hear about those a little bit more later on. There's one last question, maybe when we are talking about beef. Do you think a decreased beef consumption could have a significant impact to decrease the rainforest deforestation in Colombia and the rest of the Amazon? I think this is a very important question.
Yeah, sorry, there's some echo issues. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a very important question, I think, and it would definitely have a huge impact if the reduction of beef is established. I mean, there's other alternative proteins out there in the market. Even though you cannot or you don't want to jump to vegetal or plant-based alternatives, there's still other ways to jump. One of them is wild meat and other sources of proteins from nuts and many different products that are produced in the Amazon. So definitely, I mean, trying to reduce the rates of deforestation caused by the beef production has a direct relationship with this beef consumption. And as I said before, the connection with the cities, with the consumers in the cities, has to be very well established. And I think there's a lot of work to do by the government, but also by other organizations in supporting this, awareness of what if we jumped, or what if we contain much more alternative proteins in our diets? How is it a shift from out of beef, from other sources of protein is going to affect the deforestation? I believe it has a clear direct relationship.
Nicola, did you want to add something?
I believe in theory it can actually help to decrease this deforestation. Although there is a global market, the global population is growing, and the market are demanding very much this beef consumption. So I don't think in real terms this is going to happen. And I really would like that this can happen, but I don't think it would be in practical terms actually possible, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Jesica. Thank you, Nicola. I think this is an important discussion we can go back to maybe later on when we have, after the presentations, we have time for having a larger discussion around these issues, because these are pertinent not just for Colombia, but also for many other places in the Amazon. So this is an important question to be had at the local and global level. But for now, I would like to give the floor to the next round of speakers, and I would like to start with Juanita Esguerra-Rezk, who's actually right next to me, and I would like her to start giving a presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Torsten, and thank you, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can you see my presentation? Perfect. 1 second. Can you still see it? Does it? Oh no, you can see my notes. Sorry. How do I? Okay. Okay, so I also have a warning, and it's that I'm at the very initial stage of my research. So there's a lot of things that I'm still figuring out, but my research is about the expansion of the avocado monoculture in Cajamarca in the Department of Tolima. And I'm exploring how conflicts over the use of land have ideational, material, and emotional dimensions. And so to start, I would just like to give a little bit of context. On early 2021, Colombia became the #1 exporter of Hass avocados to the European Union. And For a country that has been for years known as the #1 exporter of cocaine, this seemed like a really big achievement. And so the media in Colombia was flooded with narratives of prosperity and pride, celebrating that the Colombian avocado was the protagonist in international markets. And these declarations came mainly from the government and the private sector. But the avocado is also the protagonist in a different kind of story that is made invisible by these narratives of market success. So as the expansion of the avocado monoculture has started to take place in particular localities like in Cajamarca, stories of campesinos have come to the fore, where they denounce the concentration of land, the deforestation of wax palm forests, which you can see in this tiny picture, and the extensive use of water that's associated with this crop. And so rather than thinking about it as prosperity, the expansion of the avocado monoculture is narrated as a threat, not only to the ecosystem and livelihoods, but also to their identity, because it affects the relationship that they have with the land. And so they also, another thing that has come through these narratives is that the avocado monoculture has also had an impact in community cohesion, because for some people it is an opportunity, for others it's a threat, and for others it can be a combination of both. So my research really tries to understand how they experience and narrate the expansion of this monoculture, so that we don't present oversimplified account of environmental conflicts. And then I think that this like market success story, or this official story of the avocado export, also speaks about a society that holds very dearly the promises of progress and modernity, and that has pinned its hope of building a different future for Colombia based on the teleological narrative of development and economic growth, without considering how these investments or these interventions are experienced in particular localities, but also shaped by the dynamics of these localities. And I say this because in 2016, when the peace agreement was about to reach when the peace negotiations were about to reach their conclusion, President Juan Manuel Santos said that peace was going to be marvelous because it could increase Colombia's GDP by 2% by increasing investment and exports. So I think what I find interesting is that in a way, this development model that is supposed to be the engine of peace and all of this investment coming can actually hinder the possibility of building more inclusive relations, not only between humans, but also between humans and non-humans. And so, as I said, I am in the beginning stages of my research, but I have two starting points when it comes to land. The first one, as I said before, is that contestations over land use have different dimensions. And in this sense, I want to explore how contestations over land use are more than disputes over the distribution of a material resource, but also enact conflicts over political order, cultural recognition, different ways of relating to nature and symbolizing nature. And also they are extremely emotional because they have to do with feelings and lived experiences that people construct with different places. And this applies not only for example, campesinos who live in a specific place, but also the emotionality of the narratives of development, which is very rarely discussed. And the second point is that land use usually requires exclusion. So if land is used in the case of the avocado monoculture, this requires like large extensions of land being converted to this single use, and that excludes not only other uses, but also other users and other ways to signify the land and relate to it. And so what my research, as I mentioned before, wants to do is between these dominant narratives of progress that push campesinos to move forward by embracing extractive development on the one hand, and on the other hand, the resistance that it has encountered, especially in a place like Cajamarca. I want to pay close attention to how they experience the expansion of the avocado monoculture. And so why do I speak about campesinos trying to avoid the Spanish masculine feminine binary, because this is important to how people define themselves in Cajamarca. And this is also a category that has been mobilized against extractivism in this place. And yeah, I just wanted to say that theoretically, my research draws from feminist political ecology, decolonial thinking, and my methodology combines narrative inquiry with an ethnographic approach. And I just wanted to end with a reflection on why it is relevant to think about this now, not only because it happened this year, but because I also think that key challenges of our time have to do with environmental destruction and increasing inequality. And so the research is not about extracting and assimilating ideas from maybe campus index organizations, but trying to understand and support the struggles, which are very complex. And I think it's important in this context because agribusiness is seen as an engine for economic recovery in the face of COVID-19 and also as a road to peace. And the Colombian government has also refused to sign the UN Declaration of the Rights of Peasants, which promotes their right to land, agrarian reforms, and more sustainable uses of land. And lastly, I also think that we need to question the role that extractive development continues to hold in post-war reconstruction, not only in Colombia, but in other countries as well. And yeah, I can update you when I am a bit more advanced with my research, but that's all I have for now.
Thank you very much, Juanita. I would like to basically jump right on to Sandra. And Sandra, are you there? Yes.
Yes, I am. I'm going to share. You should be seen.
There you go.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I will talk some things about that align well with some of the things that Juanita discussed. But I will talk about the social dynamics and land use changes in the Sumapaz region. And the research that I'm going to refer to is connected to a research project called the Nature Peace, in which Torsten is involved, and other researchers from the university. I represent the University of Gothenburg, and also the Raoul Wallenberg Institute has some researchers involved. And we're studying different countries and regions. We're studying Uganda and Colombia, and in Colombia, I'm focusing in the Sumapaz region. And the Sumapaz region, I'm sorry, I have an airplane crossing right. The Sumapaz region is a complex territory. Its large parts is the Paramo. When we started studying it, was partly the interest of this Paramo ecosystem. It's a high mountain ecosystem, moorland, also often said in English. But several parts, actually, when you really start looking at, okay, what people refer to maybe the Sumapaz territory, Sumapaz region, there are several parts that are not part of the Paramo, but some of the municipalities that are part of Sumapaz are considered outside or have parts that are not in the Paramo, or also in other type of, in lower climates, in other kind of ecosystems, for example, Savandian forest. And the Paramo, or what I refer to the Sumapaz region, includes many municipalities from the Department of Cundinamarca, from Meta, from Tolima, and it also includes a rural district from the city of Bogota, so the Sumapaz rural district. And that's very important, of course, the significance of having one part of the capital city that is included in the Sumapaz Paramo. The Sumapaz Paramo complex is the largest Paramo ecosystem in the world, and about 43% of that Paramo complex is within the Sumapaz National Natural Park. But again, not all of it is within the natural park and reserved areas or areas of conservation. The Sumapaz region had a strong FARC presence during the conflict, and it was a very strategic location because of its proximity to Bogota, but also because of the tough territory, the tough landscape of the Paramo was used strategically by the guerrillas to cross through to other parts, particularly to the east of the country. During the conflict, some of the municipalities that are part of the region were very sympathetic to the guerrillas, while others not. And that led to a lot of social and political fragmentation, which still remains today. Even in the peace process, there's some tensions where there has been, of course, a lot of pain and still a lot of healing to be done of the different fractions of municipalities and groups that had different involvements in the conflict. And of course, that's affecting the post-agreement period. If we look at some of in additional social dynamics is, in general, the region has not suffered. I think that's something very interesting, because it's very easy to get very stuck on what's happening. And kind of, I think a lot of attention has been to what's been happening in kind of the south, well, in a lot of parts of the country, but what they've been talking, you know, what all of the other panelists have been talking about, for instance, in the Amazons, in the Putumayo, also you see in the Pacific, where there has been a real resurgence of violence after the peace agreement. And the López region actually has not seen that. It has been relatively calmer and safer. And when you talk to, of course, there's mixed perceptions from population. And when you talk to some people, they say, actually, it is calmer than during the agreement, because there was such a strong FARC presence and conflict with the military. So there was a lot of battles that happened in the territory. So now, at least when it comes to armed conflict, that has definitely been reduced. And because of the Páramo ecosystem, it hasn't had the same pressure for cultivation of illicit drugs as has been happening in other parts of the country, which has also driven or mining of gold, for instance, has been driven in other parts of the country. Of course, there have been some pressures, and I think part of also on the areas where have been traditionally a FARC presence, there has been also a little bit of block, even if they're not any longer armed groups. There's still a presence that has blocked some of these insurgents of illegal actors. At the same time, it is considered that stability, say, and that sense of calm is very unstable, and it is very sensitive, and at any time very quickly can shift, particularly because there's been very little implementation of the peace agreement, and a lot of the regions have very little investment in infrastructure, particularly the east. When you think about municipalities like Gutiérrez on the east side of the Páramo, they have very little infrastructure of roads, very little social investment. So there are not enough opportunities, and very difficult for farmers, for instance, particularly farmers, to get the products out, or for youth to find productive opportunities. So that peace is, or that relative calm is, it's on a fine line that definitely needs support to make sure that it's maintained over time. There have also been some interesting social dynamics, that there have been some new groups arriving to the region, particularly on the western side, in the Sumapaz province in the Department of Cundinamarca, where they have received what's called, kind of self-referred to, new farmers or new rurals, nuevos campesinos, which are often families from urban areas, from Bogota, that move to the countryside, often with an interest in agroforestry and agritourism, agroecological projects. And then there's been mixed reception from the locals. Some welcome them and see them as, you know, bringing ideas, bringing capacity building, production, but some resist them. There have been some attempts and risk of paramilitaries and criminal bands getting in the region, but again, there has been some threats. And while there have been some threats to community leaders, community support overall has blocked killing of community leaders as opposed to other parts of the country. And there have been also some tensions with the national park, where farmers have felt that having the Páramo conservation said as you cannot use, the point of the Páramo National Reserve is for conservation, is that it blocks, actually, there's people that, you know, farmers that have traditionally lived in these areas, and that has considered that, I mean, it blocks their livelihood. But there's new legal rulings that actually have now set from 2018 that said that there can be low impact activities in the Páramo. That's been very welcomed by the farmer unions, but the Ministry of Environment is defining what that means, low impact activities. And I'm running now, I see title time, but quickly I say some of the drivers of land use change. Again, it's a very complex territory with a lot of variation. So we see mainly that in certain parts is just traditional expansion agriculture, or the expansion of the agricultural frontier, and you have what you could call traditional, but I mean by traditional, high agrochemicals and monocrops. And as Juanita had talked about, for example, avocado, which is highly detrimental for the environment. At the same time, you see reforestation and agroforestry projects and conservation projects within the national park, but also outside, increased conscience from farmers, from youth, about the importance of getting out of agrochemicals and getting into better, not getting out of monocultures. And so in balance, you can see both increased deforestation in certain parts, while you have an increase of reforestation in others. And I think something very important is that some of that is part of dynamics of the conflict, while other ones are very much disconnected from that. We can talk maybe more in the Q&A about some of the implications for that and the connection with the peace agreement. But I will end there with this idea of really the complex territory also shows complex and contrast when it comes to land use. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Wonderful. So there was quite some jump from Tolima to Sumapaz and to the Amazon. And now I think we're going to listen to Jesica. Sorry, to Paula, who's going to bring us, I think, back into the Amazon region of Colombia. Paula, the floor is yours.
Mute myself. So now you can hear me, right? So hey everyone, my name is Paula, and today I'm gonna present this work titled "The Political Economy of the Northwestern Colombian Amazon." So as Jesica and also Nicola were saying, there are some historical drivers of deforestation in the Amazon, and they are mostly linked to agricultural expansion, infrastructure development, colonization, and of course, coca crops. But since the signature of the peace agreements in 2016, we saw an increase in deforestation, that it was driven by these historical drivers, but also from new drivers of deforestation, such as land speculation and grabbing. And to curb deforestation, and to protect the Amazon, there is heavily important to understand what are the underlying economic, social, political mechanisms that are underpinning deforestation in the region. And so with this research, I wanted to answer the question, which is the causal mechanism underpinning deforestation in the Northwestern Colombian Amazon? And to address this question, I use secondary information and interviews and pre-recorded panel discussions as empirical evidence, together with theoretical concepts and processes to identify the conditions, entities, relationships, and processes that constitute the causal mechanism driving deforestation. So through this research, I argue that deforestation is a conduct for both capital accumulation for multiple actors in the region who gain surplus from converting forests to coca crops and cattle ranging. Here, I also argue that capital accumulations allow actors to attain not only capital, but also power. And to better understand how actors do this, I have classified actors in 4 different groups, but only 3 of these groups are directly engaging in deforestation activities. I also use the conceptualization of power as forms and sources of power, in which the more forms and sources of power an actor accumulates, the more overall power he or she attains. So I have created these schemes to understand how deforestation leads to capital and power accumulation. And the first scheme I will present is called Seeking to Escape Poverty. Here I argue that landless and poor peasants have migrated to the Amazon seeking land access for the reproduction of their peasant economy. When they arrive, they use the surplus from coca crops and cattle ranging mostly to subsidize this peasant economy. And peasants in particularly use cattle ranging to incorporate illegal surplus into the legal economy. However, the growing nature of the herd forced them to ever expand these pastures to remote forest areas where land is cheaper. This expansion of the peasant economy has created a lot of conflicts along land tenure, especially with indigenous groups across the region. So the weakening of the FARC forms of territorial control also provided a window of opportunity for narco traffickers and other criminal organizations to monopolize coca leaf and peace production, and also other illegal activities. And to do this, narco traffickers seek territorial control, which they attain by one, financing forest conversion to coca crops and pastures along the trafficking routes, and two, by using violence to dispossess peasants and indigenous inhabitants from their land, which in turn force them to become workers of these illegal economies. The FARC demobilization has also presented a window of opportunity for cattle rangers, investors, agribusinesses, and landlords who use deforestation for capital accumulation through land privatization and commodification. These actors do this by pursuing peasants to sell their lands, paying high amounts of money for low price lands in frontier areas. And they also finance the direct conversion of public and communal lands to pastures for cattle ranging. Capital accumulation is expected to grow not only from revenues coming from land speculation, but from agrarian production, in particular cattle ranging. Investors use this surplus to later influence policy and avoid law enforcement securing land tenure in banned areas. So to summarize, deforestation is a conduct for capital and power accumulation in the Amazon, particularly for traditional dominant groups. And although it is expected that the material domination of these groups leads to territorial hegemony, the growing international pressure on the country's national elites to secure the conservation of the Amazon has also created the need for the state to showcase actions curbing deforestation. And so it has created a conflict of interest between the national and the regional dominant classes. And this has resulted in interinstitutional conflicts and a compartmentalization of the state agencies where key institutions have contradicting agendas and end up doing little or nothing to actually curb deforestation. The states need to curb deforestation together with collusion with powerful regional actors results in a heavy criminalization of those actors that are less powerful in the region, where the state argues that forest conversion is driven by criminal organizations that have little or nothing to do with institutions or legal economies. So findings from this research indicate that deforestation in the Amazon is a highly complex problem that is determined by an intertwined web of land tenure and power. It is also now clear that FARC guerrilla demobilization presented a window of opportunity for different actors to capitalize from converting forests to coca crops and pastures for cattle ranging. However, traditional elites and other powerful actors have benefited from these persistent power asymmetries by disproportionately accumulating capital and power, which has resulted in the instauration of a capitalist economy based on land rent and drug trafficking, and has increased the tension between the national and the regional elites of the country, making that current policies end up criminalizing less powerful actors in the region. So thank you very much and looking forward to hear all your comments.
Thanks a lot, Paula. So the last speaker in this theme on social dynamics is Carlos Olaya from an organization that is quite well known in Colombia, and DeJusticia. And I would like you, Carlos, to start right away. And then afterwards, we can maybe turn back to some of the questions. And I think also Paula has already started to mention some of them, like this Artesimia initiative in Colombia and so on, and the criminalization of less powerful actors. But let's hear from Carlos first, and then we can turn to those questions. Thank you.
Do you see my slides? Do you hear me?
Yes, Carlos, we can hear you.
Okay. Wait a second. Okay, so I'm going to speak about a governmental practice that I call rating, that I have found in Guaviare. My name is Carlos Olaya. I'm a researcher at DeJusticia. I'm going to speak of 5 topics. First, what are my research questions? Second, what are ratings? Third, how are they possible in the Colombian forests? What's the problem with these ratings? And 5, if there is other way of governing forests. So let's start with my research questions. We know that post-conflict has meant higher deforestation in Colombia. The most popular explanation is that forests remain ungoverned after the peace agreement. But the problem is that if you visit Colombian forests, you can see that there's a lot of work and a lot of government programs being implemented in Colombian forests in a hardcore style. I mean, with a highly intensive manner. So, what the hell is happening? How is the state and NGOs trying to govern forests? How is it possible in this world context? And why is it not working? I went to Guaviare to make sense of these questions using ethnography of actual governmental practices. And this is what I found. My first finding is that the practice of government is what I call raiding. Raiding is to have intermittent visits to the place of intervention without claiming or building.
I'm sorry to interrupt. To interrupt you. There's something, it's very hard to hear you. There's something with the background noise. Have you switched the microphone to your own microphone on your headphones? When you click on the little arrow next to the microphone button.
What about now? No?
Oh, shit. Sorry, everybody. We're trying. Let's see how it goes.
What about now?
Still something in the background that is kind of like distracting. It sounds almost like your microphone is not connected, that you're talking to your computer microphone or something. There's a little arrow button next to the microphone.
And now? No, it's a problem with my headphones. My microphone is attached to them. And what about now?
There's a little arrow that next to the microphone, and can you click on it and then maybe like build a microphone?
I'm doing that, but it's not working.
If it doesn't work, then just go ahead, and I'm sure we can hear. It's okay.
Okay, you tell me if you do not understand. Where was I? Ratings. So, rating is to visit in an intermittent way the place of intervention without claiming or building infrastructure of power to have a more close government practice. So, as soon as government agents arrive to the place, they deploy their instruments and then they go out. They return to their offices. This practice of raiding is what bureaucrats call often field work or operatives. And if you like fancy Colombian terms, it is a technology of power to deploy governmental programs. Now, how is it possible? How is this raiding happening in Colombia's forests? I think that it is because no one is claiming or building power infrastructure there, like outposts, buildings, bio connection, etc. Nor FARC, ex-FARC armed groups, nor states and NGOs. They remain deploying ratings. So this, it allows a government by turns, as if each governmental agent is intervening in the forest edges without being in conflict with the other. Now, you may ask, so what? Government deploys ratings. What is the problem with that? Well, the problem is that it is a really unstable practice of government. First, it can be challenged, it can be interrupted by many reasons, including illegal armed groups, poor state of the roads, and of course the surge of a pandemic. Second, it is vulnerable to incoherence and contradictions between governmental agendas, something that already Paula have talked about. And third, it easily provokes the resistance and indifference of local populations towards governmental interventions. Now, is there other ways of governing the forest edges? I believe so, but not so peacefully. One of them are enclaves, a governmental practice defined by Margarita Serge, that is building and claiming power over infrastructure to control forests. It implies building, it implies deforestation, building of roads, integrating areas to the national centers. Basically, building settlements to have a more least distant control over people and ecosystems. The problem is that it is really violent. The guerrillas have tried to claim enclaves through the Tomas guerrilleras, and the state institutions also have claimed guerrilla infrastructure of power, like roads. And it's way more intrusive with people and ecosystems. We have as well assembly, like it's the practice of building community to enforce self-control rules. But the problem is that those communal institutions are not strong enough to face illegal armed groups and state institutions. So maybe we have to think about how to improve the conditions and of anti-deforestation ratings. And that's it. Let's leave it for the Q&A. My conclusions. First one, is not clear what is happening in the supposedly ungoverned forest of Colombia. Their governmental agents are used rating to deploy their plans, and it is possible that those ratings are possible because rating structure allows a government by turns. The problem is that it is a very unstable practice, and it is necessary to debate how to treat rating problems to solve socio-ecological conflicts as deforestation. That's it. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry for the technical problems.
Okay, I think we could hear most of what you said, Carlos. Thank you very much. So now I would like to take 5 minutes for some of the questions, maybe back to the speakers that just presented. And I think one of the questions that was raised in the Q&A is directly maybe going back to Carlos and the rating that you mentioned, because someone is asking about the Artemisa campaign and maybe what do you think about it? And you didn't really mention Artemisa, but I think it's partly what you probably were hinting at. So could you maybe just tell us what do you think about this particular campaign to reduce deforestation? And it links also back maybe to Paula's comment about criminalization of less powerful actors. Maybe after you've been giving your answer, we can listen to Paula as well.
I'm looking for the question in the Q&A. Okay, so when I talk about ratings, I will refer not only to Artemisa operations, but also to the field work of more gentle governmental plans. And I define them, I put them in the same basket because the practice in the terrain is almost the same. Military groups or civil groups arrive to try to conduce practices of people, and but with terrible outcomes. The Artemisa ratings are more, of course, more intrusive, more violent, but people tend to put in the same basket in their perceptions Artemisa with the interventions of civil authorities. So it is a big problem of confidence, of trust, and of a fractured relationship between local people and the external actors. There are ways to improve that relationship, but the way that the government is implementing Artemisa is not helping. They use very illegal means. They destroy things of people that they are not allowed to destroy. For instance, they destroy their homes, they destroy their animals. And it is a really bad situation. So what we have with the Artemisa is not only an aggression to poor people, to vulnerable communities, but also an aggression to the possible coherence or of state agendas. That's it.
Thank you, Carlos. Paula.
Yes, I think yeah, regarding like the military operations of to curb deforestation, I think in a way, as I was mentioning, like due to the heavy connection between deforestation and all these illegal economies, especially to the war on drugs, then there is always like these heavy military-oriented actions to curb deforestation. It has become a national security problem. Deforestation is actually treated like that in Colombia, because in a way it is argued that through these illegal economies we are financing and fueling all these criminal organizations. But it becomes, in a way, as I was mentioning, very convenient for certain actors who are like seeking economic integration of the Amazon, because making that clear cut between what is legal and illegal kind of in a way ensures that to try to it comes back to these war discourses on what we call el enemigo interno, so the kind of the internal enemy, and then it kind of builds on these narratives of we have an internal enemy and we need to fight them back in a way, and in a way Artemisa comes as the result of all these narratives and also all these discourses on the war on drugs and all criminal organizations, and then is the result of this continuation of this way of seeing the problem now, deforestation on top, as just a way of fueling armed conflict and criminal organizations in Colombia. But as I was mentioning, these illegal economies don't happen in a vacuum. They actually are very well connected to legal economies at different scales, but they end up, of course, disproportionately benefiting some very powerful actors in the region.
And thank you, Paula. And maybe there was another question that is a very complex question. It's also because you were talking about a very complex issue of deforestation and institutional complexity around it and so on. But how do you anticipate that a push of policies that increase the cost of speculation by raising the cost of land in frontier areas will perhaps be contested by powerful actors whose wealth is rooted in land sharing? I mean, this is like a bit of this, like, this like conflicts created at an institutional level, that the government has to show that there is deforestation taking serious, but at the same time, there's also like this powerful actors that are embedded in the very destruction. So what is your take on this?
Yeah, I think that as you said, is like a vicious cycle in a way, and I think the contestation is happening right away, and like I think it's so clear that contestation, it's happening every day in the country, that we haven't been able to actually push for the government to sign the SKSU agreements, even though everyone kind of in the streets do agree that the country needs to in somehow way sign this to secure people's life in the fields, in the ground. And also we see that even though there is money coming from the international aid, like the important things in the agenda haven't actually been addressed, like kind of clearing property rights in frontier areas. And it's again, it's because the people who are making the money the most out of these unclear property rights also have a lot of power at the regional, national levels. And what that the way we see this is not that policy is not being created, it's more that as Nicola also mentioned, it's that it's not enforced at all. Like we sign everything, we have been part of like a lot of climate change actions and conference, and we seem to have a very liberal and pro conservation policies in place, but we end up not actually implemented or even defunding the ones that we already have. And it's because, again, there is a very important sector and very important group in the society whose material wealth is connected to land, especially de facto land tenure, which is secure through cattle ranging, which is one of the easiest ways of just saying this is my land and I own it, and then I just create and put a fence, and no one can actually get in. I think contestation is happening all the time. The novel thing here is that before the FARC guerrilla was controlling these territories, and coca was there, but it was a completely different dynamic. Now what we are seeing is actually market integration to a global economy through more than through beef or beef consumption, is more through other to actually illegal activities, which is the heavily global demand for cocaine, and now also other rising as like gold, and we are seeing the same with timber. And probably also human trafficking. And you know, these people, when they do one illegal activity, then they end up engaging in multiple of them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Yeah, this is, I mean, we can turn back to this question at the end, I think. Okay, there's one question that was voted up, the highest one, which I leave also to the end, about violence and environmental defenders. We'll leave this to after Christina's presentation, but there's one question for Juanita that we can take now, and then we're going to move on to the next presentations. This is about the extent to which we in Sweden and the EU have a negative impact on Colombia by consuming avocados from these monocrop avocado farms. Maybe you can give a very short answer or a reflection on this question.
Yes, I think that's a really good question. And as I mentioned, Colombia became the #1 exporter to the EU. So I think most of the avocados are coming to the European Union. The question is, what should the European Union do to ensure that these avocados are not generating like social and environmental negative aspects? And I mean, I think one way to go would be having some type of certification system, and as has been done with other commodities. So that would be something that could be pushed for, but I think the problem again would be enforcement, and yeah, not just having a certification system that does not really work, or like fair trade and all of these things that are a good idea in theory, but then their implementation is really complicated. But I think those are a couple of things that could be considered from the side of the European Union or Sweden specifically.
Okay, thank you, Juanita. So now we could move to the last theme of today's webinar, and this is related to local insights. So I would like to invite Christina to share a presentation, and give us her insights from her research and work in the Putumayo, I suppose. Christina? Yes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I was on mute. While I look for my presentation, I just want to say thank you to Torsten and Jessica and the others who organized this conversation, which I think it's a really important moment to share.
Christina, we can't hear you or see you.
You can't hear me. Okay. Can you hear me now?
I hear her.
Yes, now we can. But we can see you.
Yeah. You can't see me. Okay. I'm just a moment. Let me see what's going on with my video. There we go. How about now?
No, you're still black screen.
Okay. Can you see the presentation? I have my video on as well.
No, we can't see the presentation. I think you have to, when you share screen, you have to actively choose a presentation that you want to share. Okay, just a moment. We're trying to get Christina back, and hopefully she's gonna be able to share her screen with us. Yes, now we can see you.
Hear me? Let me go ahead and share my screen. So, let's see. Can you see now?
Yes, we can see and we can hear you as well.
Great. Okay. So as I was saying, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I want to just briefly share some findings, ethnographic fieldwork that I carried out as part of my doctoral research in Putumayo from 2016, so before the signing of the peace agreement, through 2018, 2019. Putumayo is located in the Andean Amazonian Piedmont, and it's an important ecological corridor that's also part of Colombia's arc of deforestation. Putumayo is also part of the one of the territories that has been prioritized for the implementation of peace in Colombia. And following the signing of the peace agreement, the deforestation within Putumayo has increased dramatically. This is the disarmament of the FARC. Forests have been converted to pasture for cattle ranching as a form of land grabbing, which is also tied to land speculation, following expectations for land titles, and road construction as part of the implementation of the peace agreement. This is also further tied to narco trafficking networks within the Amazon. And what I found is that cattle ranching is also the only viable alternative for many campesinos who've been transitioning from coca to illicit agricultural alternatives within the context of the peace agreement. And so within this context, there's also been increasing coca cultivation, which has expanded as government support for alternative agricultural production that's been promised in the peace agreement has been slow to reach communities, and also due to the narco trafficking connected with criminal groups, dissident FARC, residual paramilitary groups who have taken up arms, once again, citing government's failure to guide the peace agreement within the region. So in this context, Putumayo, the rates of forest loss continue to rise, along with the killings of campesinos and social leaders who have been committed to eradicating coca and protecting forests. So just very briefly, I want to spend the next few minutes tracing deforestation occurring in the years following the signing of the peace agreement to ongoing colonization within Putumayo, or as one campesino called Otra Guerra, or another war in Putumayo. And then I'll turn to these insurgencies that have emerged in response to this war, and the potential of rastrojo, which is the secondary forest growth that emerges following forest disturbance, which is presenting a possibility for responding to forest destruction and colonization, and for constructing peace. And so rastrojo emerges on farms that were deserted in the midst of war, and for communities navigating life in the wake of conflict, and in the edge of this frontier. It's the recolonization of the farm with the forest, and it constitutes a form of resistance to forest destruction, towards a peace that's grounded in a relational, reparative relationality with the forest itself, on which their lives depend. So I think briefly, if I have a few minutes since Carlos isn't here, I want to just mention briefly, because I think it's important to consider the deforestation taking place within a kind of historical context in Putumayo. It's important to consider that, well, first, that Putumayo is one of the territories prioritized for the implementation of peace because of the presence of coca cultivation and armed conflict. That coca cultivation back generations in Putumayo when the country's interior and in the pre-century. And campesinos were because of the getting signals at the festival. Campesinos displaced to the frontier were given land predicated on the conversion of pasture. And once government's entitlements ceased, they turned to coca. Coca became essential for their living conditions there on the frontier due to the lack of roads and the inability to transport other products. It also provided financing for the operations of the FARC, whose presence in Putumayo since the late 1970s filled the role of carrying out projects like the construction of roads. The FARC also regulated coca and crop production, including the cultivation of food crops and the limitations on land clearing, of forest clearing. So Putumayo had some of the rates of coca production in Colombia. Around the turn of the century, they were targeted for fumigations through Plan Colombia. This destroyed food crops, not only coca crops, and it contributed to increase in deforestation. as campesinos look to returning to grow coca to compensate for the loss of their food. This transition, during the fumigations, many of the campesinos also transitioned to cattle ranching. And this transition is also increasingly common within the implementation of the peace agreement. The government's program for the eradication of coca and transition to illicit crops, which is the Programa Nacional Integral de la Sustitución de Cultivos Ilícitos. It involves payments to campesinos to eradicate coca and for the implementation of productive illicit crops. It's also complemented of land titles. Road building has been, in a demand for campesinos within particularly remote areas in order to enable the transition of their illicit crops. And with the recent construction of roads, there has been a correlation with increased cattle production. Even regional authorities or in local government have been celebrating road construction as a way cattle ranching. And so for those campesinos who are navigating these precarious conditions of peace in Putumayo, cattle ranching has been the only alternative in many cases for campesinos to here there's a canteens with milk explain that they live from the cattle, and everything. The cattle gives them everything. And in this transition from coca, destroyed, are being used for cattle are also impacted. Are difficult. But the important thing to highlight here is that those campesinos who are just surviving are not like the big cattle ranchers, so they say. There are those who have a lot of cattle who are taking lots of land. And those who are just surviving claim that they have to live on something, and to live, they have to knock down forest. And so within context, cattle ranching is increasing for campesinos who lack other viable alternatives. However, the more destructive cattle ranching is linked to large skin grabbing, which is also connected to narco trafficking. And since the demobilization part regulated how much forest could be cleared on farms and restricted expansion and access to forest, land grabbing, mostly through the conversion of forest to cattle ranching, has been as a 20% of deforestation. And this is linked to expectations for land titling and road construction. And as I mentioned, to investments for narco trafficking, connected to dissident FARC, paramilitaries, and other groups who coordinate the chain of coca production for narco trafficking within the Amazon. These groups are also charging vacunas or taxes on the purchase and milk. And so they're also the threat to a lot of to those who have denounced or reported a lot of the deforestation taking place. They've reported that they are being silenced or threatened to not report on the massive deforestation that's been taking place by those groups. So this shift of coca to cattle is contributing to a growing problem of forest loss, And within this context, the National Program for the Substitution of Illicit Crops also includes provisions that alternatives should contribute to reducing forest loss and restoring degraded soils, but it remains unclear the extent to which illicit agriculture is considered forests. The substitution program is poorly implemented in Putumayo, with late payments and the failure of the government to deliver on productive projects that actually correspond to the living conditions of campesinos there. Within this context, campesinos have continued to cultivate coca. Those campesinos, in addition to pressure from groups that have taken over narco trafficking in the territory, coca production has increased, and so too have the killings of campesinos in programs for the eradication of coca. They have received death threats, were killed due to their involvement in eradication programs. And this is connected to the presence of groups like the Comandos de Frontera, which is comprised of dissident allies following the peace process, or those who rearmed, informal paramilitaries from the Putumayo bloc, and narco who were involved in the negotiation of coca production. And so this situation is only exacerbated by the government's decision, along with pressure from the United States, to resume coca from fumigations with glyphosate in this year, 2021. And so within this context, I want to turn briefly to the possibilities of peace within Rastrojo. Like I mentioned, Rastrojo is it's present on farms that were abandoned in the midst of war. It's actually increased in some parts of Putumayo during the conflict, though Rastrojo is cattle pasture as campesinos who were displaced are returning to their farms and finding cattle ranching as the only viable alternative as a illicit form of production. For many campesinos navigating life here, Rastrojo is also the colonization of farms, of cattle ranching farms with the forest. It constitutes a form of resistance to ongoing colonization and forest destruction. And it's a form of cultivating peace grounded in a reparative relationality with the forest on which their lives depend. In this way, our hope peace that grounds the campesino within the continual life of the forest. As one campesino described, cultivating Rastrojo is a life plan for living together with the forest. This particular campesino here, who had set aside over 20 hectares of cattle pasture for regenerating forest, explains that there's no peace without forest. The forest is life. It's about learning to live from Rastrojo. So in this case, Rastrojo indicates both forest destruction, but also the possibilities of life's ongoingness and peace, or as one campesino described it as recolonizing the farm with the selva. So recolonizing the farm with the selva is a form of reparation of the destruction of forests and a way of transforming inheritances of this ongoing war towards the process of peace. I'm still connect, there we are. This includes the reparation of soils on farms throughout Putumayo that were rendered lifeless from fumigations, trampled by cattle. Recolonizing the farm with the selva involves collection of soils and seeds from the forest to regenerate conditions of forest growth for the life of the forest and for campesinos alike. This is a way of regrounding campesinos together within the life of the Amazon. They call themselves selvecinos, a term that describes their relationality with the selva. It's a proposal, what they're calling selva farming, for the cultivation of different interpretations of peace. It's a response to the continued coca cultivation, fumigations, cattle ranching, and productive projects that are being implemented or promoted within the context of the peace agreement for campesinos to transition from coca to licit crops, which are oriented towards agro-industrial development, including the imposition of certified seeds through ICA, the Colombian Agricultural Institute, and the use of agrochemicals. And so this selvecino right here, this woman who appears in this, Ica is coming to the region to casinos that are developed. And the problem is the majority of people who come here to casinos and
Christina, sorry to interrupt you, but I think we have to like wrap up so we have some time for the last questions that are still in the chat and then the Q&A.
Oh, of course, no problem. So I'll wrap up. Forests are integral to peace, depend on soils, which in turn depend on the indicates other than coca and cattle.
Okay, I think we have lost Christina again. But all right, let's use the last 15 minutes that we have for this webinar to maybe go back to some of the questions. And there were some active discussions in the chat already about land and who has the right to actually use and own forest land, and how actually does this affect maybe the chance to fight deforestation, to slow down deforestation, and so on. And I would like to address or to give this question to Natalia, maybe to give a brief commentary and answer to this question that was raised here.
Hi, Torsten. Thank you. And yeah, and I appreciate all the answers that some of you already provided in the chat to Sabina's question. I repeat the question: what if natural forests and their ecosystem services are declared as a strategic national assets and heritage of public interest? So it's as a matter of public interest, protected as public interest, and then for, I guess, controlled by the government. And she says, in that sense, there is no way to have property rights, but only concessions to certain uses according to its social and ecological function. If there is an agency to manage subsoil strategic assets, why there is no institution to manage forests as public and national heritage and assets in Colombia? And I'm excited about this question, because it actually gives me the opportunity to talk about something that I'm close to, because I live in Canada. And in Canada, I don't know if you're aware of, but the government has a lot of control over the land under a figure called like crown lands. Like huge extensions in Canada are declared as crown lands. And many of those lands, most of those lands, are actually stolen lands. You know, they were property in a wider sense. They were under the control and then were, like the territories of indigenous peoples, First Nations, as we call them there, here. But what I want to say is that those concessions exist. There is a forestry authority, a Ministry of Forestry in each province, and then they manage concessions. And what it has produced is like this idea of conservation through forests that are properly managed. So people criticize that approach heavily because it implies that, you know, forests are not preserved. And there is a whole struggle led by indigenous peoples, but also by others to preserve like the last remnants of old growth forests. So the image that everyone has about Canada having a strong government that protects conservation is a bit problematic because most of those forests are not for conservation. They are actually a business. And that's why Canada produces, you know, paper and other products derived from the forest. Also, no one prevents, once you have that and you have control over the land, and no one prevents that from, you know, going anywhere into like mining, like extraction or oil, you know, extractions, which is something that happens a lot here. So I don't know, I just want to question these ideas about space and about people we tend to reproduce when we think about, you know, like, oh, what we need is like, I don't know, an additional agency that really controls this, or an additional way of classify this space, and rather to take, as I was saying, like a step like behind and start questioning how is that we approach what is a forest? How is that we approach what is the relationship between people and so-called nature, you know, and start to unpack that and to unpack the ways in which that those complex relationships have been like, I don't know, framed in legal terms and others in terms of property rights and these things in very restrictive terms to favor the views that some people have and not that many have about that relationship that doesn't consider indigenous peoples, Afro-Colombians in the case of Colombia, First Nations in the case here, or campesinos also in the case of Colombia, and other racialized populations. So sorry, I went a bit long, but that's my answer.
Thank you, Natalia. I think this is an important question because I think sometimes we're turning in circles when we talk about more conservation, but then actually taking away access of resources and rights. I mean, historic rights of people, many people who lived in these areas for such a long time to actually use these resources. So this is an important question, particularly because, I mean, we now have these ongoing COP negotiations, new like targets for the biological diversity, and these big like 30 by 30. So protecting 30% of the terrestrial ecosystems by 2030, what does it mean by protecting it? Protecting it from whom? And protecting it how? And I think it's important, particularly in Colombia, to recognize that almost half of the forests in the country are actually legally owned by indigenous people. It should probably be more because these people have been living there for such a long time. They have been displaced many times because of historical situations, the rubber boom, and now they're being displaced again. So it's a very it has to be seen from an historic perspective, but also from a rights perspective. And this is really crucial. And this gets actually back to the question that we had, and that was also high up in the Q&A session about why are particularly like people who are like living in these territories, and Christina mentioned this as well, people who are defending the territory, who are defending natural resources, who are defending the forest, why are they being killed? And so who is behind it? And also, why has the government of Colombia actually not signed the Esguerra-Rezk agreement that was signed by most countries in South America? And I think this is an open question, and I would like to give the floor to maybe to Nicola and to Jesica and to Paula. Everybody can come in here because I think this is really important, and particularly in light of the report that came out last week by Global Witness showing that Colombia is the most dangerous country in the world if you are defending your territory, if you're defending nature, if you're standing up for human rights. And you're talking about real people who get threats and who get killed on basically like a weekly basis in Putumayo, in Cauca, in Nariño, in Santander, across the country, basically. So it becomes really dangerous to actually stand up and fight for protection. And where is the government, and what does the government do apart from just delivering empty speeches? So there's an open question. I have to inform you, we tried to get hold of Julio Andres, but we can't reach him. He's somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, and it's really hard to get hold of him. So we're posting a link to a video that he would like to share with us, and we can just take the last minutes to actually talk about these questions, and also about the very urgent issue regarding the violence that is sweeping Colombia at the moment. So I don't know who would like to start. Maybe I start with Nicola, and then we can go through the list of potential people who would like to answer.
Yeah, as I was saying in my presentation, there is a lack of physical and legal presence of the government in several of these regions. So the state is absent there, not just physically, but also it doesn't follow what is the legal, all these criminal activities. The state is not efficient in following this crime. And from my perspective, it's mainly a political problem. So it is not really a top priority of the government to protect this population, to protect these local populations. And on the other side, also maybe it does not have adequate structures. The laws are there, but is there enough people? Why they're not putting in place a task force in order to counteract specifically this problem, this huge problem, which is getting worse and worse. So as a reflection of this political problem, is that why also the government is not signing or is postponing the signing of the Escazú agreement? It might be, maybe it represents more like a problem they know they cannot solve, or a problem that they don't want to solve, really. It didn't reach really like the level of the top priority to protect these people, and as well as indigenous and Afro-descendant population there. And as a consequence of this, also the illegal actors, they are becoming more and more powerful. And we're not just talking about narcos, we're also talking about these very powerful illegal ranchers, that they have a huge connections with the local politicians, with the military, etc., etc. I've been told that some military, they also buy land, stolen land in some areas of the country. So there is really a level of connivance. There is a hidden system, not so hidden as well, that is working and assuming more and more power and perpetrating this type of crimes. And we're not just talking about only local population, but also people that is working for the government. So also park guards, they are getting killed more and more. So mainly for me, it's very few words like that is not a top priority for this government. I don't know if someone wants to add something.
Thank you, Nicola. I think Paula was going to say something as well.
Yeah, I can just build on that. So I think a little bit it's a political issue, because again, as I think Natalia was mentioning, like the status quo in Colombia considers themselves as white people, part of the Western world, and in a way we're not only seeing this in Colombia, but for commodity demands of different commodities, it is important to ensure the market integration of the Amazon, and that's benefiting a lot of people that are very powerful in the country, because their wealth is very connected to multiple of these activities, like going from coca to land itself, which is also now becoming a commodity when you integrate land into the market as well. So I think that's a core thing to understand. So like the wealth of a lot of people that are part of the status quo and that consider themselves as Westerners is so rooted in taking out the forest that there is no actually incentives to protect the forest, and actually there is a lot of incentive to get to dispossess people from their land, because then you make them workers of these other economies. So when you dispossess people or you dispossess peasants, you then kind of have this free workforce that can actually be integrated into this very productive and very productive economic system that is again connected to a lot of both legal and illegal economies. So I think it's about both, it's a political thing, but it's very rooted into economic wealth.
Thank you. I think we're almost nearing an end, but I would like to give the floor to Carlos and then to Jessica before saying some final words.
I just want to reply some things that Sabina Talero is asking in the public chat about the role of collective property And I think that there's a misconception of a causal relationship between collective property and forest conservation. I think that that relation is a correlation, but not a causation, because if you watch all the collective properties in Colombia from indigenous people and Afro-descendant people, they are located far from the cattle frontier. So they are well conserved, but because they are far from the problem. Within those territories, they have a lot of problems that are facing people who inhabit within the forests. For instance, illegal mining, contamination with mercury. So we have to, I think that we tend to debate a lot about governmental programming, which laws are correct, which plans do we have to face, which designs, institutional design we have to implement, but there's less debate about how those programs, laws and plans are being implemented. And about environmental leaders, I think that it's a greater problem in the Pacific region than in the Amazon. In the Amazon, there are environmental leaders who have been killed, who have been menaced, but it is worse in the Pacific region because there, those killings are related with local elites more strongly than in the Amazon region. In the Amazon region, those killings are a responsibility of FARC dissidents, most of them. But in the Pacific region, it is a huge problem. Even if we have a more progressive government, let's say that a left-wing government arrives to the presidency, he will have to face the problem of negotiating with local elites that have strong ties with Mexicanos, with dissidents of FARC, and with narco elites. And that's it.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, maybe the final word to Jessica before I close this webinar today.
Yeah, what I was just wanted to ask, following the different discussions and the different opinions from all the other panelists, is that, I mean, as long as we don't have, or the case in Colombia is very specific, and as long as we don't have a clear territorial zonification, I mean, there are enormous amount of data, enormous amount of, you know, different protocols to how to limit the different uses of land to specific regions in the country. I mean, this is backed up by the power of the organizations that are behind the land use. But as long as Colombia and the governments and many of the other stakeholders don't finalize the clear zonification of specific uses of land, I think we're gonna go into a toxic wheel, because this is where we actually can end up organizing ourselves a little bit. Obviously, it has a lot of work to do, but I think the mentality of the, at least what is behind this catastral multi-purpose territorial reform, is having this introduction of, okay, we really need to start organizing the use of land. Otherwise, we will need to, you know, just move all the forest away from what the ecosystem ecological functioning is, and then we will just go as the same as Brazil, agribusiness oriented. And this is where we're going to get lost if we don't start organizing ourselves. I think I end up there.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I think going back to the initial topic of this webinar was taking stock after 5 years, and we realized that there is a lot to take stock in, and there's a lot of questions coming up showing the complexity of the peace agreement, which actually have led to a different type of conflict. And as Christina has shown, it has led to a conflict with the environment. It has led to conflict with local communities. And I think it's important to actually make the general public internationally, this is also the reason why we had this seminar or this webinar today in English, to make people aware of what is going on, because the actual, I mean, the conflict doesn't end with the signing of a peace agreement. It has actually just reformed itself. It's a transformation of a conflict that is taking place, and it's a scramble for resources. It's a scramble for land. It's a scramble for power. And we have to see this in the international context, in the global context, because many of these resources are actually finding their way to global markets, be it gold, be it illicit drugs, that finding their way to the United States, that find their way to Europe, to Asia. So we have to see that in a global context. And I think it's a responsibility of the Colombian government, of the governments of all other countries in the world that actually are in one way or another importing goods from Colombia, but also for other countries, the same thing holds, to actually like fight the destruction of the environment and to fight social injustices and the grabbing of land. And I think it's important, particularly for us, we are in Sweden right now, most of us, but also like people who are coming from Germany, the UK, Norway, to actually ask and hold the governments accountable for where does the money go that is spent on supposedly development projects and supporting the peace agreement in Colombia. And what does it do on the ground? So there's lots of questions and lots of things going on that we have to reflect on. And we also hope that we can share a short video of this webinar at some point when it's edited and when it's done. And also to maybe like write a joint piece together with the panelists that we will hopefully like can lift the message up to the international audience. So thank you everybody for coming today. I'm very sorry for the technical difficulties we had at some point, and I hope you learned something from today's webinar. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon or a pleasant day if you're in Colombia, and take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.